Graham Allison had never been a superstitious man. At 67, he lived a quiet life in a small house by the pine woods of Vermont with his wife, Margaret, the woman who had been by his side for nearly 40 years. Every morning, he made coffee, read the newspaper, and checked his emails. Everything was routine, like an old song he never tired of. Until last Tuesday morning, amidst a slew of spam and promotional emails, Graham received a strange message. No sender, no subject line, just a single sentence. Check under the floorboards in the garage before it's too late. He thought it was some kind of prank. But the strange thing was, his garage didn't even have floorboards. It's just plain concrete, since the day the house was built over 30 years ago. Yet, when he stepped into the garage that day, he noticed something he had never seen before: a long crack running along the back wall. As if someone had once broken through and patched it up, and then Graham decided to break the concrete. Didn't know why, he just knew he had to. He could never have imagined that what lay beneath the cement would turn his entire life upside down. An old rusted metal box. Inside, photographs of Margaret, but Margaret from decades ago, standing beside an unfamiliar man. A birth certificate, torn, faded train ticket, and a secret that made him realize maybe he never truly knew the woman he had been living with all these years. Asterisk, it took Graham nearly 2 hours to chip away at the hardened cement floor in the garage. He didn't use a drill, just a hammer and an old chisel from his days as a carpenter. Sweat poured down his face, despite the autumn chill. His hands trembled, whether from exhaustion, age, or a creeping sense of dread. He couldn't tell. Beneath the thick layer of concrete, something finally emerged. An old metal box, dusty and rusted. Graham lifted it out, his heart pounding. I felt as though he had just touched a memory he'd never lived. He opened the lid. What lay inside made him freeze. A stack of old yellowed photographs, clearly showing a young woman, Margaret, his wife. But her hair was longer, her clothing style unfamiliar. And most strangely, stood beside a tall man in a leather jacket. His arm wrapped intimately around her waist. A birth certificate. The name read Annabelle Morris, mother listed as Eileen. Maurie's father unnamed. The date of birth matched Margaret's, but the name was entirely different. A train ticket from 1983 Albany to Chicago. The ink had smudged, perhaps from water damage. Graham sat motionless. He had never heard Margaret mention anyone named Annabelle. And he had never seen photos like these in any of their family albums. So who was his wife really? Was the Margaret he knew, loved, and married truly the woman he thought she was? He picked up the stack of photos, pulling out the largest one. On the back, in faded handwriting, were the words, "Don't believe what she tells you." He stared at the writing, then tucked the box into his coat pocket. Stepping out of the garage, he saw Margaret watering the plants on the porch. Her gaze was gentle, just like every other afternoon. But to Graham, nothing felt normal anymore. That evening, as Margaret washed the dishes, Graham quietly slipped into his study. He opened his laptop and typed the name Annabelle Morris into a search engine. There wasn't much, but in a grainy local news article from 1984, he found a faint headline: "Missing, Annabelle Morris, 26. Last seen boarding train to Chicago." Graham's chest tightened. If Margaret was Annabelle, had she gone missing? Or was she running from something? Why change her name? And why hide it for all these years? He sat in front of the screen for hours, thoughts racing. Part of him wanted to confront Margaret right away, but another part wanted to go deeper, to uncover the truth quietly, carefully, because for the first time in nearly 4 decades of marriage, Graham wasn't Saray truly knew the woman sleeping beside him. Graham didn't sleep. All night, he sat in front of his computer, sifting through hundreds of old articles, missing person notices, and obscure forums that had somehow preserved traces from a time when the internet was still a distant concept. The name Annabelle Morris led him to a local newspaper from Illinois, with an article dated July 15, 1984. The piece was only a few short paragraphs. Annabelle Morris, 26, mysteriously disappeared while en route to Chicago. Her family stated she intended to start a new life after a failed relationship. The last person seen with her was an unidentified man who appeared at the train station several hours before her departure. An unidentified man. Graham thought of the photo in the box, the man holding Margaret, or Annabelle. He kept searching, typing Annabelle Morris plus Chicago plus missing person. This time, new results appeared. A blog post written by someone named Daniel M., claiming to be Annabelle's cousin. I remember my mom saying Aunt Annabelle fell in love with the wrong man. She disappeared after saying she was running away from someone. The police never found any leads. We believe she was harmed. A chill ran down Graham's spine. She had been running away. From whom? And why did no one know that Margaret was Annabelle? Shut the laptop. The next morning, while Margaret was out grocery shopping, Graham did something he never imagined himself doing. He went through her closet drawers after a few minutes. He found a small wooden box, locked tight, tucked beneath a false bottom drawer. There was no key. But with the instincts of an old carpenter, he gently pried the hinges open with a screwdriver. Inside was a worn leather notebook, frayed at the edges. The first few pages were scattered notes and trivial thoughts, but halfway through, there was a passage that made his heart stop. If someone ever discovers who I used to be, I only hope they understand. I wasn't running from someone, was running to survive. I never wanted to lie to Graham. He was the first man to show me what love meant without bruises, without control, without questions about the past. But the past never truly sleeps. Graham froze. Suddenly, he remembered the faint scars on Margaret's back. The ones she always brushed off when he asked. He had once thought they were childhood injuries. Now he began to wonder. Was the man in the photo her abuser? Had she faked her death, changed her name to escape someone dangerous? And if that were true, was he still alive? Did he know where she was? That evening, Graham made a decision. After dinner, as they sat together in the living room, he pulled out the old photograph from the cement box. Do you know who this man is? Margaret went pale. Her hands trembled, and the glass of water slipped from her fingers. Shattering on the floor, she stared at him, wide-eyed. Where did you find that? Under the garage floor? How long has that box been buried there? Margaret said nothing. Her eyes brimmed with tears. And then she said something that made Graham go cold. He's dead. Or at least, I thought he was. But last week I got a letter, no signature, but the handwriting, it was his. Silence fell over the room, and Graham couldn't tell what shocked him more. That Margaret had hidden this past for so many years, that the man, the one who had forced her to erase her identity, might be back. Graham sat in silence, his eyes fixed on Margaret as if seeing an entirely different person. She was no longer the gentle, quiet wife he had known for decades. The woman before him now carried a secret, and it seemed she had carried it for nearly 30 years. Margaret met his gaze, her eyes misty but unwavering. You deserve to know the truth, Graham. I can't keep running anymore. And then she began to tell the story, the one she had buried along with the cement box nearly 3 decades ago. Back then, she wasn't Margaret, she was Annabelle Morris, an elementary school teacher living in the suburbs of Chicago. She met Victor Hale when she was very young, a charming, intelligent man who worked in real estate. At first, Victor was everything Annabelle had ever dreamed of. Romantic, wealthy, and skilled at making her feel special. But after the wedding, everything changed. Victor controlled every aspect of her life, from the way she dressed to her friends, even her job. It started with cold words, then shouting, and soon escalated to slaps, punches whenever she disobeyed him. I thought I could endure it, Margaret said, her voice trembling. Until the night he tried to strangle me because I answered my sister's call without asking him first. Annabelle tried to run, twice, Both times she failed. Victor always found her, always knew where she was hiding. It was like he had cameras all over the world, she whispered. He'd always smile when he found me, like it was some kind of hunting game. In the spring of 1984, Annabelle decided to disappear, not just run, but vanish. With the help of a friend who worked in the coroner's office, she faked her death. She took on a new identity, Margaret Ellison, backed by forged documents tied to an unreported clinical death incident. She moved to a small town, cut off all contact with her family so no one would be at risk. And there she met Graham. "You were the first man to see me as a person, not a possession," Margaret whispered, placing her hand over his. "But I couldn't bring myself to tell you the truth. I was afraid you'd leave. Afraid that if Victor was still alive, he'd come for me." Graham squeezed her hand. His heart was a storm of emotions. Part of him felt betrayed, but a larger part, the greater part, was heartbreak for the woman who had lived in fear her whole life. She hadn't betrayed him. She had saved herself. "And the letter you got last week?" he asked gently. Margaret reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "No return address. It's just a few handwritten lines in blue ink. Don't think you can hide forever. I've always known where you are. Don't make me knock." Beneath it, a small symbol arose with its stem cut in half. Margaret shivered. That was the symbol he had tattooed behind his shoulder. I recognized it instantly. Graham shot to his feet. In that moment, the instinct to protect overtook every ounce of fear. "We're going to the police. He won't lay a hand on you again." Margaret shook her head. "There's no proof. He didn't sign it, didn't leave a trace. And he has excellent lawyers. More money than you can imagine. Just trust me, I've seen what he can do." Graham took a deep breath. He knew one thing for certain. If Victor was truly back, they had to prepare. No more running. This time, they would face him. After a pause, he asked quietly, "The cement box, what was it, really?" Margaret spoke slowly. "Things I couldn't let go of. The last pieces of who I was before I disappeared. A photo of me and my mother, my journal, and don't slip of paper, the only evidence I ever had against Victor." Graham frowned. "What kind of evidence?" Margaret lowered her eyes. "You'll see. But if you find it, that means he's started the game again. And this time, he's not just after me." Graham understood now. The secrets inside the cement box weren't just fragments of the past. They were a warning for the present. And the real question now was, is Victor truly alive? Or is someone else trying to drag Annabelle, now Margaret, back into the shadows of a past she fought so hard to escape? The next morning, before the sunlight could slip through the window, Graham was already dressed in his gardening clothes, carrying a chisel, a hammer, and a flashlight. He returned to the shed behind the house. Margaret was still asleep on the living room couch, exhausted after everything she had revealed. He knew if there was anything else in that box that could protect her, he had to find it now. The cement floor had cracked open the night before. Graham struck the fissure hard with the hammer, large chunks breaking away with each blow. Within minutes, he hit Metalaw's small steel chest, rusted with age, but still locked. Using a knife, he pried it open. The click echoed dry and sharp in the silence. Inside, along with the items Margaret had mentioned, a faded photograph, a yellowed leather journal. There was also a sealed envelope. On its surface, in delicate, precise handwriting, were the words "only open if absolutely necessary." Graham hesitated for a moment, then tore it open. Inside was a short letter and a Polaroid photo. Faded, but still clear. The photo made Graham's breath catch in his throat. In it, a man stood next to a young woman who looked like a younger version of Margaret. But what startled Graham wasn't them. It was the third person in the frame, partially obscured, standing in the shadows of a doorway, himself. It was him, a younger, thinner version, but unmistakably Graham. His hands trembled. He unfolded the letter. "If you're reading this, You've either remembered or you're about to. They did something to us. Victor isn't just a man, he's part of the system. They control memory, change identities. I was one of the first to wake up. You knew me once. We tried to expose everything, but then you disappeared, and me was forced to forget you. The signature at the bottom was shaky, scrawled. Annabel Graham reeled. He looked again at the photograph, then opened the leather journal. On the first page were scattered broken notes, right like someone scribbling in fear. Mid-panic day. 14, they injected it again. I don't remember where I was this morning. Graham, if you're reading this, don't trust anyone. They reset your memory every time you get too close. Victor isn't dead. He's the handler. It's the one who trained us. He's in control of everything. Graham felt his blood run cold. What Margaret had told him the night before wasn't just her story, it was his suddenly. A noise behind him made him spin around. Margaret was standing in the doorway of the shed, but her eyes, they weren't the anxious, tearful eyes from the night before. They were blank. Emotionless, void of memory. Graham, she said, voice flat and steady. Why are you out here? What time is it? Graham's throat tightened. Do you remember who I am? Margaret blinked a few times, then gave a soft laugh. Of course I do. Why would you ask that? But Graham noticed she was holding her phone, and on the screen wasn't her contacts, not messages. It was a GPS tracking app. A blinking red dot marked their exact location, the shed. Graham said nothing, quietly. He closed the chest, lowered it back beneath the broken concrete, and pulled Margaret away. They were being watched, or worse, they had always been controlled. Graham didn't sleep that night. The box had been temporarily hidden back under the cracked cement floor, but not because he was afraid someone would find it. It was because he wasn't ready to face himself. He sat in silence, watching Margaret sleep on the couch, her breathing steady, still holding her phone in her hand. The screen glowed faintly, displaying the logo of an app he had never seen before. Neurotrace memory regulation. Graham froze for simple words, yet they cracked open an entire nightmare. An app that regulates memory. The next morning, taking a leap of faith, Graham called a name he had found in the old leather journal. Clara Jensoon, the only one mentioned with an address, when he arrived at the small suburban house at the edge of town. An older woman opened the door. Her eyes were deep, the kind that had seen far too many buried truths. You're Graham, she said without surprise. I thought you were dead. Maybe I was, he replied. Clara led him inside, shut all the curtains, and turned on a white noise machine. Then she handed him something, an old video file stored on a memory card. Part of your memory is real, she whispered. We were part of a resistance. Margaret, Annabelle, Yui were all subjects in Neurotrace's experimental program. But after a data breach, they wiped everything, rewrote your identities, gave you a new life. Graham shuddered. And Victor, not a person, Clara said with a bitter smile. An AI, a self-learning system initially developed by the military, then privatized. It doesn't just erase memories, it rewrites people's personal histories. So I was never a woodworker? Graham asked, voice barely steady. No. Clara's response was firm. You were a scientist. One of the first to realize that memory isn't just something we recall, it's data. Data that can be copied, edited, or completely erased. She handed him a small device, a chip. Deactivated. If you want the whole truth, implant this. It's a backup of your memory. Before the wipe, Graham stared at it like it was a bottomless pit. If he used it, everything he knew, his life, his love for Margaret, the years of peace might vanish as false constructs. But if he didn't, he would keep living inside a lie. What about Margaret? He asked. Clara hesitated, then pulled out a photograph. In it was Margaret, but not the Margaret he knew. She was in uniform, holding a rifle, standing amid a group of operatives. eyes cold and distant. "She was a handler," Clara said softly. "She was the one who detained you. Then she fell in love with you. Or maybe that memory was just part of the restructuring protocol." Graham returned home, the chip clutched in his hand. That evening, he simply watched Margaret cooking dinner, chatting about trivial things, playing old songs on the radio as if everything was normal. But her eyes were watching him, too, like they were both waiting for the other to break first, before bed. Margaret said quietly, "Maybe we should go somewhere tomorrow, get out of town for a while." Graham nodded, but deep down, he knew, she knew, and she was running that night. Once she was fast asleep, Graham slipped out to the shed behind the house, took the chip, and slotted it into the simple scanner Clara had given him. A stream of footage appeared instantly. He saw himself, Graham, sitting inside a glass-walled room. Across from him was Margaret, but not the gentle wife he knew. She was an interrogator. Then 3 knocks, sharp, deliberate, echoing. From the front gate, then silence. Graham stood, the scanner still running in his hand asterisk just as the final knock echoed through the air. The device in Graham's hand went dark. He stood frozen. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, but no other sound followed. He stepped into the hallway. The porch light hadn't turned on yet. A lone figure stood by the back gate still and silent. "Open it, Graham?" came the familiar voice. Margaret, but she hadn't knocked on the front door. She was standing at the back gate, a path they had never once used, cautiously. Graham unlatched the gate. "I know you implanted the chip," Margaret said flatly, skipping any pretense. "I know you used to be my handler," he replied, eyes locked on hers. Silence. In that brief moment, they were no longer husband and wife. No longer two people who had built a quiet life together. "So what's real?" Graham asked. Margaret looked up. Her gaze softened for a heartbeat, but her voice remained cold. "I don't know anymore. After your last memory wipe, Estade, I requested to be the final overseer. But over time, things changed. The morning coffees, the evenings you spent fixing lamps, me cooking dinner, those things stopped feeling like a mission. So your love for me is real?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "I think so," she replied. "Or maybe I just convinced myself it was." Graham stepped back. Inside him, a storm raged, emotion versus reason. His heart still raced whenever he looked at Margaret, but his mind replayed every frame of the video. Her in that glass room, cold, detached, the one who had ordered the memory. Erasure. "Victor is coming back," Margaret said quickly. "Clara was taken this morning. And if you still have the original chip, they'll come for you. So, you're here to save me?" Graham asked bitterly. "No." She shook her head. "I came to ask you one question." Graham waited. Margaret stepped closer and pulled something from her coat Paquita. Second chip, smaller, silver, different from the one Clara had given him. "This is my true memory," she said. "If you want to know everything, implant it." "And then what?" he asked. "We live in truth together or drown in chaos together." Margaret didn't answer. She just looked at him with eyes both foreign and familiar. Graham stood there, gripping the chip tightly. In his mind, the past programmed memories, hidden truths all collided into a roaring storm. He knew if he implanted the chip, he could never go back to the quiet, loving life they'd built, no matter how false it was. But if he didn't, he'd be choosing a warm illusion over a cold truth at last. Graham asked, "If I implant it, and I find out you never loved me, then what?" Margaret pressed her lips together, her eyes suddenly glistening. "Then at least one of us will have lived honestly," she said softly. They looked at each other one last time, like two actors standing at the edge of a stage. As the curtain was about to fall, Graham sat alone on the old wooden chair in his study, Margaret's silver chip resting silently in his palm. Outside, the wind whispered through the cracks in the windows. Inside this house, once a home, once the place he believed he had lived, A full life there remained only a man and a decision. His eyes wandered around the room. Every object stirred a memory, or rather, a programmed memory. The bookshelf where Margaret kept her letters. The wedding photo in the hallway where he paused. Every morning, the kitchen corner where he used to help her cut carrots every weekend. If it had all been orchestrated, what was left of him? Graham let out a long sigh and opened the wooden box in his drawer. Inside was the storage drive holding the original memory Clara had stolen. He plugged it into the computer. A foreign interface appeared. Identity: Graham Pierce, Trial 04. Core Memory Archive. He clicked open. Images on the screen took his breath away. There were no joyful dinners, no tender moments with Margaret. Instead, he saw an underground testing facility. A secret tribunal with Graham present. A man's voice yelling, "You've compromised 43 test subjects. We can't fully erase memories while you're still alive." And Margaret, stepping forward, signing a consent form, approved permanent memory erasure. Assign lifelong supervision. Graham lowered his head. It was all true. He hadn't been a victim. He had once been the architect of the entire memory experiment. And when he tried to back out to expose everything, the organization had chosen to erase him from society, and Margaret took on the role of his lifelong handler in exchange for keeping fragments of her own memory. Now he understood why she had always felt like a stranger, and yet so familiar. The next morning, police stormed the house. Victor was found dead in a mysterious explosion. Clara still missing, and Graham had vanished. The house was tidy with no signs of forced departure. Only one envelope remained on the kitchen table. Marked :Margaret. Inside were the silver chip, a small note. "You don't need to know whether you ever truly loved me. Just know this. No matter how many times they rewrote everything, I always found my way back to you." Margaret sank to the floor, hands trembling as she held the note. From afar, a surveillance camera captured the moment, then blinked off. The organization had no trace of Graham. The man who once led the experiment had chosen to erase himself from the system. Years later, in a quiet village in southern Spain, locals spoke of an old man living in man who came to the market each morning to buy a single flower and a fresh notebook. No one knew who he was or where he came from. They only knew that every evening he sat by the window, writing quietly, never forgetting to place a small photo on the tabla woman with a gentle smile. Her name, Margaret. Dear friend, what would you do if one day you discovered that every memory you've trusted was carefully constructed? Would you dare to erase it all just to uncover the truth, even if it cost you everything? Graham's story isn't just a journey filled with twists and pain. It's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't being lied to, but choosing to live forever in a beautiful lie. Maybe Margaret didn't truly love Graham, or maybe that love grew during years of pretending, but in the end, something real remained. What remained was a choice. Graham chose the truth, even if it meant disappearing. What about you? If you stood before a memory that might not be real, would you keep it or let it go? Leave a comment below. I choose the truth, or I choose the memory, because who knows, your answer might just help someone out there find their own way. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. We'll be back with more stories touching, thrilling, full of the unexpected, just like life itself. See you next time.